He sat at that table in a plain gray suit. His jaw was bruised on the left side, swollen in the way that only happens when your face meets something cold and hard and fast, and the thing you hit does not move, but you do. His left wrist was wrapped in a brace. He kept his hands in his lap folded together perfectly still. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 28 years old. He was a doctoral student at Harmon University, and he had never once in his life been arrested. Not one ticket, not one warning, not one moment where a police officer had ever written his name on a piece of paper and called it trouble, until 11 days ago. Now he sat in Courtroom 7 of the Harmon City Municipal Court, in a plain, gray suit his mother had pressed for him that morning with a bruised jaw and a brace on his wrist, and a charge sheet that said he was a violent man who had lunged at a police officer on a dark street. None of it was true, and in 48 hours, the officer who put him in that chair was going to be arrested in that same building, led out in handcuffs by the same bailiff who was standing 6 feet from Marcus right now, arms folded, watching the morning come to order. That is not something I am guessing. That is not something I am hoping for. That is exactly what happened. But before we get to the handcuffs, before we get to the video and the gavel, and the 6 seconds of silence that followed after the screen went dark, you need to understand something. The story does not turn on luck. It does not turn on a dramatic confession, or a last-minute witness, or some twist that arrived from out of nowhere. It turns on 19 seconds. 19 seconds of footage captured on a phone held steady by a woman in a second-floor window who did not set out to change anything that night. She was just leaving a late seminar. She heard a voice below that did not sound right. She looked out the window. She pressed record. 19 seconds. That is all it took to bring down a career built on 11 years of protected lies. 11 years of complaints buried before they could be heard. 11 years of a father's name closing doors that were supposed to stay open. And so this story begins where all of these stories really begin, not in the courtroom, not under the fluorescent lights, not in front of the cameras that eventually showed up, but on a cold, quiet street in October, under a working streetlight at the corner of Kellner and Anson, where a young man was standing still, listening to a voicemail from his thesis advisor, thinking about a paragraph in Chapter 4 of his dissertation. Just that, nothing else. The doors of Courtroom 7 opened at 8:47 in the morning. The bailiff called for order. The gallery, which had been carrying the low murmur of people waiting for something they already sense is significant, went quiet. Judge Elaine Morrow walked in. She was 61 years old. She had been sitting on that bench for 22 of them. Her robes were pressed, not for the occasion, out of habit. That is the kind of judge she was. Her hair was silver at the temples and cropped close, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She settled them onto her face with the deliberate calm of someone who has long since stopped having anything to prove and has been doing the work anyway every morning for 2 decades. She did not announce herself. The room did that for her. The air in Courtroom 7 changed the moment she entered it. The temperature shifted not from cold, but from the particular gravity that 22 years of service without scandal, without reversal for misconduct, without a single credible complaint about her own judgment creates in a room full of people who understand what they are sitting in the presence of. She sat. She opened her folder. She picked up her pen. She began to write. She had not yet looked at Dana Pruitt. She had noted her. She had registered everything about her in the first 4 seconds, the posture, the crossed legs, the phone, that had been put away 1 beat after the bailiff entered rather than 1 beat before. She had noted all of it and catalogued it, and she would look at Dana when she was ready to. And this is a story of what happened when a woman who believed the law was hers to own, who had worn her father's protection so long, she had stopped being able to feel the shape of it, walked into that room, and stood before a judge who had spent 22 years making absolutely certain that it was not. Marcus Webb grew up in the South Ward of Harmon City, Illinois. If you have never been to Harmon City, the South Ward is easier to understand by what it lacks than by what it has. It lacks the kind of infrastructure that moves quickly. Traffic lights that get repaired in a reasonable window after a storm. Grocery stores with hours that match the hours people actually need them. Sidewalks that get patched before the crack becomes a hazard. What the South Ward does not lack, and has never lacked, is people. People who have built lives and families and futures in a city that has historically not arranged itself to make that any easier, and who have done it anyway because the alternative was not going, and not going was never an option they were willing to consider. Marcus Webb was the product of two of those people. His mother, Gloria Webb, worked as a medical billing specialist at Harmon General Hospital for 23 years. Precise. Patient. Organized in the way that some people are organized, not because they were born that way, but because they decided early that precision was the only tool they had complete control over, and they were going to keep it sharp. She kept a large paper calendar on the refrigerator door, the kind with the wide grid squares. She crossed off every school day with a red marker from the first morning of kindergarten, all the way through the last afternoon of Marcus's senior year of high school. People who came into her kitchen would look at that calendar and assume she was counting down. She was not. She was counting up. Counting towards something she had decided was going to happen for her son well before he was old enough to know what she had decided. His father, Edmund Webb, drove a city bus on the Route 14 corridor for 18 years. He knew every stop by the feel of the road under him, the slight grade at a certain intersection, the sound the engine made coming up on the shelter at Carver and Maine, the way the light in the morning came through the front windshield at a particular time of year and hit the rearview mirror at exactly the wrong angle. He knew the city the way you know a place when you move through it every day at ground level, when you see it in rain and heat and snow, and the flat gray light of a Wednesday in February that looks exactly like every other Wednesday in February for 18 years. He also knew the other thing. The thing that a black man in a uniform in Harmon City learns about his relationship with law enforcement, whether he goes looking for that lesson or not. Edmund Webb had his own encounters over the years. He had stories he told and stories he did not tell. He knew the men he ate lunch with at the transit depot, men who drove the same routes and carried the same knowledge and passed it on to their sons the way you pass on anything. You know, matters more than it should have to. Edmund sat with Marcus in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon when Marcus was 15 years old. He said, "There is going to come a time when a police officer stops you. It may be because you did something wrong. It may be because you did nothing wrong at all. It may be because you were somewhere at the wrong time, or because someone looked at you and made a decision about you before you said a single word. None of that will matter in that moment. What will matter is what you do." He said, your job in that moment is to come home. He said, keep your hands visible. Speak clearly and loudly enough that it cannot be disputed later. Say your name first. Never reach for anything without announcing what you are reaching for, where it is, and why you need it. He said, I am not telling you this because I think it is fair. I am telling you this because I need you to come home. Marcus was 15. He sat at the kitchen table and he listened. He did not say much. He remembered every word. He carried those instructions with him into college, into graduate school, into the doctoral program, into every space he entered, where he understood that the space had not been built with him in mind. He carried them into the parking lot on Kellner Street on the night of October the 14th. He carried them the way you carry something your father put into your hands when you were 15 years old and told you to hold on to. You do not think about it. You just hold on. The dissertation Marcus was writing had grown out of a single observation he had made in his second year of research. He had been deep in the complaint records from a precinct on the east side of Harmon City, sorting through which complaints resulted in formal review and which were classified as resolved without hearing. He noticed something. The complaints that disappeared that were resolved without process were not randomly distributed across the data. They clustered around certain officers, around certain supervisors, around certain types of complainants. He spent 3 weeks testing the observation before he trusted it. He tested it 6 different ways. He brought it to Dr. Holloway, who told him to test it 3 more. The pattern held every time. He wrote a section he called The Architecture of Silence, the ways in which institutional complaint processes can be structured or can fail to be structured so that certain voices do not survive the process. Not because the voices are wrong, not because the complaints are frivolous, but because the process does not require that they be heard. He was 3 years into documenting that architecture when he stepped out of the Rosen Library on the night of October the 14th and encountered in the most direct and personal way available one of its mechanisms. He thought about that later. He thought about it the way you think about something that is too large to hold all at once. You turn it over slowly. You look at one face of it at a time. You sit with the part of it that says that the research you were doing was also in some sense a document of your own life, that every one of those 412 data points was a person who had a father who taught them the same things Edmund Webb taught Marcus, a person who had done everything right in that moment and had it counted against them anyway. 412, and then 413. The Rosen Library at Harmon University closed at 11 on weeknights. Marcus had been there since 5 in the afternoon. 3 papers spread across the table, each one flagged with yellow tabs. A legal pad, dense with his own handwriting, mostly questions he was asking himself. A cup of coffee that had been hot at 6:30 and stone cold by 8, and which he kept meaning to throw away. At 10:47, he packed up. He zipped the laptop into his bag. He tucked the legal pad under his arm. He dropped the coffee cup in the bin by the exit. He pushed through the heavy library door into the October night. The air hit him the way October air in Illinois does. Not tentative, definite. The cold of a season that has made up its mind. Wood smoke from somewhere nearby. The mineral smell of the sidewalk after afternoon rain. He pulled his jacket close and walked east along the edge of campus toward the parking lot on Kellner Street, where his car, a 7-year-old Honda with a cracked passenger mirror, sat under a light that the city had been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. He was thinking about the chapter, about a footnote he had left unresolved, about whether a correlation he had noticed in 2 East Side precincts was a real finding or an artifact of incomplete reporting. His phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Dr. Patricia Holloway. He stopped under a working streetlight at the corner of Kellner and Anson. He held the phone to his ear. Dr. Holloway's voice was warm and slightly worn at the edges, the particular texture of a voice at the end of a long day full of other people's difficult questions. She said she had read through his latest draft. She said the argument was building well. She said there was one paragraph, the framing paragraph at the top of the 3rd section of Chapter 4, that she wanted to talk through. She thought she could see how to make it stronger. "Come by at 9, she said, if you can." Marcus smiled at the phone. He played the last 30 seconds again to make sure he had the Chapter 4 note exactly right. He stood under the streetlight, bag on his shoulder, breath making soft shapes in the cold air, phone at his ear, completely still. He was not watching anything. He was not pacing. He was not doing anything that any person of reasonable mind could have described as suspicious or erratic or concerning in any way. He was a young man in a jacket standing under a streetlight listening to a voicemail from his thesis advisor about a paragraph he needed to revise. A city patrol cruiser rolled slowly down Kellner Street. Marcus noticed it the way his father had taught him to notice it. The particular, peripheral awareness. He did not turn to look at it directly. He let his hands hang visible at his sides. He did not shift his weight or change his posture. The cruiser slowed as it passed. It drove to the far end of the block. It went around the corner, and then it came back. Inside the cruiser, Officer Dana Pruitt drove with both hands on the wheel, and her jaw set in the way it was almost always set. Slightly forward. The muscles along the jaw tight. The face of someone who has already made a decision and is now moving toward it. She was 34 years old, 11 years on the force, athletic build, short auburn hair kept cropped close, a jaw that colleagues had learned to read over the years the way you learn to read weather. Those colleagues did not call her difficult, at least not loudly. They called her the Hammer sometimes, when she was not in the room. Not cruelly, with a kind of resigned acknowledgement of who she was, and had always been the kind of acknowledgement that comes when something has been going on long enough that people have stopped asking whether it is right and started treating it as a fact of the landscape. She believed genuinely that she was protecting the city. That is the part of Dana Pruitt that is most important to understand. She was not performing. She was not putting on a show for the rookie. She was not consciously prejudiced in the way that word sometimes gets used, as though prejudice is something a person sits down and consciously chooses like a side dish at a diner. Her prejudice was something else. It was calcified. It was built into the architecture of how she saw the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator because you have been in the room with it long enough. She saw a black man standing on a corner near the edge of campus at night. She decided in the 3 seconds it took the cruiser to pass him that this was a problem, and 11 years of buried complaints told her she was right to decide that. 11 years of nothing happening to her told her that her judgment was reliable. 11 years of her father's office absorbing whatever went wrong had taught her without a single explicit lesson that the things she did not have consequences. That was the education Raymond Pruitt had given his daughter, not with words, with silence, with a memo reclassifying 9 complaints and removing them from the active case queue because continued review serves no purpose and undermines unit morale, with a filing cabinet that held 9 sets of words from 9 different people who had trusted the process and got nothing back. Nate Greer sat in the passenger seat. He was 26, 8 months in. He had come into this job because he believed in something. He was still trying to understand what that something looked like when you were actually doing the job rather than thinking about doing it. He had a small spiral-bound notebook in his inner jacket pocket. He had bought it his first week. He wrote in it after every shift. On the night Dana turned the cruiser back around toward Kellner Street, Greer looked at the man standing under the streetlight. He saw a person in a jacket with a bag on his shoulder and a phone to his ear. He did not see what Dana saw. He said nothing. That silence was its own choice. He knew that. He would keep knowing it. Dana pulled the cruiser to the curb. She did not activate her body camera. She stepped out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. She crossed toward Marcus at a direct angle, the stride of someone who has already decided what the encounter is going to be and is simply closing the distance to begin it. Her right hand hung loose near her hip. Greer got out on the passenger side. He was slower. He stood by the car for a moment before he started walking. Marcus heard the car door. He lowered the phone from his ear. He turned toward the sound. As he turned, his hands came up and out from his body, palms open, visible. The reflex of a man who has been practicing this compliance since he was 15 years old, who has practiced it so many times that it no longer feels like practicing, it just feels like turning around. "Hey, Dana," said. "Turn around. Hands. No name. No badge number. No reason given for the stop. No explanation of any kind. Just 3 words delivered to a man who is already turning around, already showing his hands, already doing everything right. Marcus said his name. He said it clearly and at a volume that could not be disputed. He said he was a graduate student at Harmon University. He said he had just left the library and was going to get his car. "I need to see your ID," Dana said. She was already close. Close in the way that communicates without any additional language that this is not going to be a conversation between 2 people of equal standing. Marcus said yes. He said his ID was in his bag. He said he was going to reach in slowly to get it. He said it in the sequence his father had taught him. Announce what you are doing. Say where the item is. Move slowly. He reached. Dana did not wait. She grabbed his arm. She twisted it behind him and up, using her weight and her momentum and the particular leverage of someone who has done this enough times to do it without thinking. And she used that leverage to drive him forward against the hood of a car parked at the curb. Marcus did not resist. Not then. Not at any point during what followed. Not one motion of his body that could have been called aggression. His face made contact with the hood of that car, the cold metal, the edge where the hood panel met the frame, the particular sharpness of cold metal against warm skin at speed. He did not cry out. He spoke. He spoke clearly at the volume his father had told him to use because volume was documentation, and documentation was the only form of witness available to him in that moment. "I am not resisting. I am a student. My ID is in my bag." He said it 3 times across the course of what followed. 3 times. Each time with the same steadiness. Each time absorbing the pressure without letting it take his voice. Dana told Greer to cuff him. Greer stood on the sidewalk. He looked at Marcus, face against the hood body, completely still, not pushing back, not struggling. Just breathing, just holding onto the voice and the stillness like they were the last things available to him. He looked at Dana. He looked at Marcus again. 2 full seconds. He would think about those 2 seconds more than he would think about almost anything else from that year. More than the verdict. More than the testimony. Those 2 seconds would be the ones he replayed. The ones he measured himself against, because in those 2 seconds he knew. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He knew what had happened and what was going to be written in the report and what the difference between those 2 things was going to cost. And he stepped forward anyway, and he put the handcuffs on Marcus Webb. The click of the cuffs carried clearly in the cold air on that quiet street. And across that street on the 2nd floor of the Harmon University Sociology building, a window was cracked open 3 inches. A woman sat at the desk nearest to it. Her name was Priya, 3rd-year doctoral student, same department as Marcus. She had just come out of a seminar that ran long, and she was gathering her books and her bag when she heard Dana's voice from the street below. She looked out. She took in what she was seeing. She understood what she was looking at in the time it takes to recognize something you have been taught to recognize. She picked up her phone. She held it against the window frame. She pressed record. She filmed for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She did not post it. She did not text it to anyone. She backed it up immediately to cloud storage because her phone was low on local memory and she had never changed the default setting. That unchosen detail, the unconsidered default setting, would turn out to be one of the most consequential things about that night. She called Dr. Holloway from the parking lot. Dr. Holloway listened. She said, "Call Shaw." Priya called him. Shaw answered. He said, "Back it up to a second location." He said, "Say nothing to anyone." He said, "Wait." Then he went to see his client. The footage sat on 2 servers, silent and patient, like an answer waiting to be asked. At the precinct, Marcus was processed. He was photographed. The swelling along his jaw was noted in the intake form. No one said anything about it. He was placed in a holding cell. He sat on the bench. He did what his father had taught him to do when everything else was taken away. He went through every second in his mind. Every word, every sequence, every detail of position and timing and distance. He committed it to the part of his memory that does not let go of things when they matter. He was not panicking. He was not raging. Both of those things would have been entirely understandable and entirely justified. He chose neither. He chose clarity, because clarity was the only tool still in his hands. When they returned his phone, he called Colton Shaw. Shaw answered. He listened to everything Marcus told him without speaking once. When Marcus finished, Shaw said, "Do not say a word to anyone in that building. Not to guards, not to anyone in that cell, not to a friendly face. I will be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 18, and 4 blocks away on 2 cloud servers, 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage waited. Back at the precinct in the bullpen where the shift reports were typed up each night, Dana Pruitt sat at a desk and wrote the arrest report. She typed steadily. She was not nervous. She had written reports like this before. She wrote that Marcus Webb had been exhibiting behavior consistent with suspicious surveillance of nearby commercial properties. She wrote that when she approached and requested identification, he became immediately combative. She wrote that he refused multiple requests to comply. She wrote that when she attempted to guide him toward the patrol vehicle for a standard field interview, he lunged at her. She used the word lunged. She used it the way you use a word that has become a tool you reach for because it has worked before, and you have never been given a reason to find a different one. She listed the charges: resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct. She entered the note about the body camera, malfunction, her 7th in 18 months. She entered the code that logged it as a technical fault rather than an officer-initiated shutdown. She initialed the form. She submitted it. She drove home. She did not think about Nate Greer's face when she told him to cuff Marcus. She did not think about the 2 seconds. She had not noticed the 2 seconds. She had been thinking about the report. Nate Greer sat in his car in the parking lot of his apartment building for 45 minutes before he went inside. He had the notebook open on the steering wheel. He read back what he had written after the last 6 shifts with Dana. He read slowly. He read carefully. The way you read something when you are looking for a pattern you already know is there, but have not yet been willing to name. He closed the notebook. He went inside. He did not sleep well that night. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks later, Courtroom 7. The charges against Marcus Webb: resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct. DA Sandra Okafor was at the prosecution table. She was meticulous, principled, prepared. She had reviewed Dana's service record as transmitted by the department. 11 years. Commendations. No visible issues. What she had not received was the complaint history, the 9 cases, the 9 people. Raymond Pruitt's office had made sure those files did not travel anywhere near her desk. She walked into Courtroom 7 that morning believing she had a clean case. She had done everything a careful prosecutor is supposed to do. She had just been handed material that had been poisoned at the source by a man who had been poisoning wells for a very long time. Dana arrived early. She sat with her phone and her crossed legs, and the particular relaxed confidence of someone who has testified 14 times and found it no more alarming than a routine inspection. Judge Morrow entered at 8:47. She surveyed the room. She wrote one line on her legal pad. She said, "We are in session." Dana took the oath. She said the words the way people say things they have said until the words no longer have gravity. D.A. Okafor walked her through the events on Kellner Street. Dana's account was smooth, polished in the way that stories get polished when they have been handled often. The rough places gone, the hesitations gone, the moments where reality failed to cooperate with the narrative quietly taken out. She said erratic. She said combative. She said refused to comply. She said lunged. At the defense table, Marcus wrote lunged on his legal pad. He drew a circle around it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set the pen down. Colton Shaw stood up. He walked to the witness stand without hurrying. He carried a thin folder. He placed a document on the railing. The digital sign-out log from the Rosen Library, he said. Mr. Webb's card swiped at the main exit at 10:47. Your report places first contact at 10:49. I observed him in the general area earlier, Dana said. Near the library exit. Shaw placed a second document next to the first. Your patrol vehicle's GPS log for that evening. At 10:44, your vehicle was at Bryant and Delworth, 4 blocks away. He let that sit. Is it your testimony that you observed Mr. Webb from 4 blocks away at night in 38-degree temperatures? GPS systems have a margin of error, Dana said. I know what I observed. Shaw said noted. He returned to the defense table. He did not push the camera question yet. He planted it and let the room work with it. He could see Morrow writing. He could see Sandra Okafor holding very still, looking at something in her file. Then Morrow put her pen down. She looked at Dana over her reading glasses. Officer Pruitt. How many times has your body camera malfunctioned during a field contact in the last 18 months? Dana said, a few times. The number is 7, Morrow said. I have the maintenance log. She wrote something on the pad. She said, continue, Mr. Shaw. The room shifted. The particular shift of a room when a fact has been entered into it that cannot be taken back out. Dana felt it. She was experienced enough to recognize it. And here is where she made the choice. She could have become more careful, more moderate, more measured. She could have let the shift happen and adjusted to the new temperature. Instead, she leaned forward. With respect, Your Honor, she said it with the voice of someone who has decided the best defense is to reframe the entire room. A man was combative with an officer. I understand there are sensitivities around cases like this, but the law should not bend based on who is sitting in that chair. The gallery went very quiet. The implication was clear to everyone present. She was suggesting that Morrow's race was influencing her judgment, that a black judge would side with a black defendant, that the correct administration of justice required pushing back against Elaine Morrow. D.A. Okafor looked at the table. Dana added, My father has served this city for 30 years. This department's record speaks for itself. Morrow did not blink. She removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Dana. A long, even completely unhurried look. The look of a person who has been watching for something and has now seen it exactly where she expected to find it. She picked up her pen. She wrote one word on the legal pad. She underlined it twice. She put the pen down. She said, Thank you, Officer Pruitt. Then, before we continue, I have a question for the prosecution. Morrow turned to Sandra Okafor, counselor. Were you aware that the prosecution's subpoena request for external surveillance footage from the Kellner Street corridor was denied at the precinct level, and were you aware of who authorized that denial? Okafor looked at her file. She turned pages. She found it. She said the denial was authorized by Deputy Chief Raymond Pruitt. Morrow said, I want the record to reflect that this court independently subpoenaed available surveillance footage from the Kellner Street corridor. That footage arrived this morning. She looked at Dana. Officer Pruitt, I'm going to give you one opportunity to amend your testimony. 1. Once I play this footage, that opportunity is closed. Permanently. There is no going back from what this room is about to see. A silence. Dana sat with the rigidity of someone whose entire structure of certainty is being tested, and who has decided to pass the test by refusing to acknowledge that she is in it. My testimony is accurate, she said. Morrow said to the clerk, please play Exhibit C. The monitor came on, mounted to the left of the judge's bench. The footage was from a phone, slightly handheld, filmed through a window from the second floor looking down at the corner of Kellner and Anson. The image was clear. The street was quiet. October cold. The streetlight at the corner cast a steady pool of light, and standing directly in the center of that light was Marcus Webb, laptop bag on his shoulder, jacket pulled close, phone to his ear, completely still, not watching anything. Not pacing, not doing a single thing that any reasonable person could describe as threatening. He was standing under a streetlight listening to a voicemail. The gallery watched without making a sound. Then the cruiser came into frame, rolling slowly from the left, pulling to the curb at an angle. The driver's side door opening before the car had finished stopping. Dana Pruitt stepping out. And as she cleared the door, her hand came up to her chest. 2 fingers, the power button on the body camera. She pressed it twice. The indicator light went dark. In the witness stand, Dana Pruitt went very still. On screen, she crossed the street toward Marcus, and the phone's audio, sharpened by the quiet of the night, and the open window above, caught her voice. Hey, turn around. Hands. No identification. No reason stated. Just 3 words before she was within arm's reach of him. On screen, Marcus turned slowly. Both hands came out and up, open palms. He said his name. He said he was a student. His voice was steady. Dana grabbed his arm before he had finished the sentence. She twisted it behind him and drove him forward against the hood of the parked car. The gallery in Courtroom 7 heard the sound of it. That dull, sudden impact. Marcus did not move against her, not once. His voice came over the audio. I am not resisting. More pressure. I am a student. And then the moment. Dana leaned close to Marcus's ear. She said something. The street camera would have missed it entirely. But Priya's phone, 2 floors above with the cold night air carrying the sound perfectly through the open window, caught every syllable. Morrow had the audio amplified, and the gallery heard Dana Pruitt say, You think that degree means anything out here? You're just another body I am moving off a corner. The screen went dark. The standby light of the monitor cast a blue-gray glow across the front of the room. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The court reporter's hands were in her lap. She had stopped typing. She was not certain court was still in session. Judge Elaine Morrow sat with both hands flat on the bench. She did not speak for 6 seconds. In the ordinary world, 6 seconds is nothing. The space between one heartbeat and the next, several. In Courtroom 7, in the aftermath of what had just been heard, 6 seconds was an eternity. Then Morrow said, Officer Pruitt, you are no longer a witness in this proceeding. You are the subject of it. You could watch what happened to Dana Pruitt in those next few moments, the way you watch something structural fail. Not a collapse, not a sudden thing. More like the particular shift in a wall when the thing behind it that had been holding it up is no longer there. She said that footage does not show the full context. It does not show what happened before. You cannot make a judgment from one angle on one phone. Morrow said the footage begins 14 seconds before your vehicle stops. That is the full context. Dana said I stand by my testimony. Morrow said to the clerk, "Bring in Detective Vance." The side door opened. Iris Vance walked in. Dark jacket, dark slacks. She carried the leather case with both hands with the careful deliberateness of someone transporting something that took a long time to build, and that she is not going to allow to be damaged now that the moment has finally arrived. She sat in the witness stand. She opened the case. She placed the file on the ledge. Dense, compact, heavy with months. Morrow said Detective Vance, "Describe the contents of that file for the court." Vance looked at the room, not at Dana, at all of it. She said, "This is a formal internal affairs investigative file on Officer Dana Pruitt of the Harmon City Police Department, covering the period from 18 months ago to the present. It documents 9 use-of-force complaints filed against Officer Pruitt during her 11 years of service." She said none of those complaints received a formal hearing. None of the individuals who filed them were notified of any outcome. Each was reclassified as resolved officer exonerated without review. Morrow said continue. Vance said the file also contains an analysis of the 7 body camera malfunction reports logged by Officer Pruitt over the previous 18 months. That analysis shows a consistent pattern. The malfunctions were reported after contacts involving physical force. They were logged using a code that bypasses the standard audit function. She said, additionally, the file contains a memo dated 11 months ago signed by Deputy Chief Raymond Pruitt, directing the Records Division to reclassify all pending complaints in Officer Pruitt's service file as resolved without hearing, and to remove them from the active case queue. She placed the memo on the railing. Morrow picked it up. She read it. Every word, without hurrying, with the care of a judge who wants the record to be unambiguous about what was read and when and by whom. Then she read it aloud into the record, every sentence, her voice steady throughout. In the witness area, Dana Pruitt's hands were white on the railing. She heard her father's words read into the permanent record by the judge. He had tried to keep off this bench 12 years ago. She heard them land. She heard them stay there. Colton Shaw stood. "Your Honor, the defense calls one final witness." Morrow said proceed. The side door opened. Officer Nate Greer walked in, 26 years old, in his uniform, looking older than 26. He did not look at Dana as he walked to the stand. He sat. He placed the small black spiral-bound notebook on the ledge. Cover soft from handling, binding thick from months of opening. Shaw said, "Officer Greer, you were present on Kellner Street the night Marcus Webb was arrested." "Yes," Greer said. "In your own words. Describe what you observed." Greer said Mr. Webb was standing under the streetlight. He was listening to something on his phone. He was not moving. He was not watching anyone. He was not doing anything. He said, when Officer Pruitt exited the vehicle, she did not announce herself as a police officer. She did not state a reason for the contact. She said, "Hey, turn around hands." That was the entirety of her introduction before she was within reach of him. He said Mr. Webb turned around with his hands up. He said his name. He said he was a student. He did not lunge. He did not raise his voice. He made no aggressive movement of any kind. He reached for his bag to get his ID, which is exactly what he said he was going to do, and Officer Pruitt grabbed his arm before he could finish reaching. He paused. He said he was forced against that car while he was in the process of complying. The courtroom was quiet. Shaw said the body camera. Greer said, "Before Officer Pruitt stepped out of the vehicle, I watched her reach to her chest and press the power button on her camera twice. I saw her do it. I understood what it meant." He stopped. He said, and I said nothing. He said it plainly. As a true account of a thing about himself, he was no longer willing to keep only in a notebook. He said, "I am saying it now." Shaw said the notebook. Greer opened it to the page he had marked. He said, "I have kept this record of my personal observations after every shift for 8 months. The entries are dated, they are timed, they describe what I personally saw during field contacts. In those 8 months, I have documented 23 incidents where my personal observations did not match the official report filed after the fact." He placed the notebook on the railing. Shaw said 6 entries directly contradict filed reports. Greer said yes. Dana Pruitt stood up from the witness area. Her voice was high and tight in the way a person's voice gets when the thing holding it together is almost gone. "You are lying," she said. "You are doing this because I flagged you for insubordination. I told your supervisor you were not ready for this assignment. And now you are up there with your little notebook trying to take me down because of it." The gavel came down. One strike, sharp. The sound of a full stop at the end of the sentence this room had been building for 11 years. Morrow said, "Sit down." Dana sat. Morrow looked at her. The long, steady, unhurried look of a person who has seen what needed to be seen and is now ready to say what needs to be said. She turned to Marcus Webb. She said, "Mr. Webb, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You are free." She turned to Dana. "Bailiff, remove Officer Pruitt's service weapon." The bailiff stepped forward. Dana did not move immediately. The room watched her. Her hand moved toward her hip. Several people in the gallery stopped breathing. Then she reached down. She unbuckled the holster. She held the weapon out. The bailiff took it. The sound of the gun on the metal tray was the loudest sound in the room. Just that, flat, heavy, metal on metal. The sound of something being taken away that was never going to come back. Morrow said, "Officer Dana Pruitt, I am referring this matter to the state's attorney of Illinois for charges of perjury, official misconduct, aggravated battery, and civil rights deprivation under color of law." She said, "This court is also formally requesting a federal civil rights review of the complaint handling practices of the Harmon City Police Department, with specific attention to the authorization protocols of the Office of Deputy Chief Raymond Pruitt." She closed her folder. "This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down. As the bailiff guided Dana toward the side door, she passed the defense table. She passed Marcus Webb. He was standing. They were close enough to speak. He said nothing. He looked at her with the quiet, exhausted recognition of a man who has been telling the truth the entire time and is watching the moment arrive when the truth was enough. Dana held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then the bailiff guided her through the door, and it swung shut, and the sound of it moved down the marble hallway and faded. The news moved through Harmon City that afternoon the way water finds level. By noon, Deputy Chief Raymond Pruitt was on administrative leave. By 3, the state's attorney had confirmed a formal inquiry. By 6, the Inspector General had served subpoenas for 10 years of records. Raymond's attorney said he had acted within departmental guidelines. The Inspector General released the memo the following morning. Raymond Pruitt's memo. His words, his signature. Directing 9 complaints to be buried without hearing because, and this is his exact language, continued review serves no purpose and undermines unit morale. 9 families. 9 people who had used the system in good faith, who had written down what happened, who had given their names, who had waited, and heard nothing back, because Raymond Pruitt decided his daughter's comfort was worth more than their truth. Those families received phone calls the week after the hearing. Some of them did not know what to say at first. Some of them sat for a long time after they hung up. They had not been expecting the call. They had stopped expecting anything. Sandra Okafor held a press conference 2 days later. She said, "My office was provided an incomplete case file in the matter of the People versus Marcus Webb. The complaint history of the arresting officer and the body camera documentation were omitted from what the department transmitted to us. I am conducting a full review of how that case was assembled and why those materials were withheld." She said, "I am announcing today that my office will independently review every case in which Officer Dana Pruitt provided sworn testimony over the previous 5 years. Every case. If we find charges were brought based on false testimony, those individuals will be notified." She did not take questions. She walked back to her office and sat in the dark for a while. The police union released a statement supporting Dana. Within the week, 4 members of the union board had privately contacted the state's attorney's office, not to support Dana Pruitt, to cooperate with the inquiry that was now expanding faster than they could manage. Raymond Pruitt entered a plea 3 weeks later. He surrendered his pension, his badge, the title on the door of the 4th-floor office. He did not go to federal prison. He cooperated. He went home, to a house that was quiet in a way it had not been before. Dana Pruitt was processed at the Harmon County Jail on a Thursday morning in November. She knew this building. She had brought people here, handed paperwork over the counter, walked out into daylight. She had never paid attention to the sound inside. Every surface hard. Every noise coming back at you from everywhere at once. The smell of time and cleaner and the weight of days. The intake officer was named Carla. She had been at that desk for 12 years. She processed Dana's intake with the same professional efficiency she brought to every intake. Not soft, not hard, correct. Dana recognized her. 3 years earlier, Dana had said in front of several officers that Carla was too lenient, that she needed to be harder. Carla did not show any sign of recognition. She was not soft. She was correct. And correct, Dana was beginning to understand as a different thing entirely. Dana asked for a private cell. She was placed in general population under standard protective watch. That was the protocol. It applied to everyone. In her first week, she learned what it means to wait, for a hearing date, for a phone call, for a meal tray, for someone to answer a question. The indignities were not dramatic. They were ordinary, the friction of a world that did not move on her behalf. Just Tuesday and Wednesday, and all the days after that. The trial of Dana Pruitt lasted 4 days. What made it weighty was not the evidence. The evidence was clear. The footage was clear. The notebook was clear. Iris Vance's file was thorough and precise. What made it weighty was the 6 people who came. 6 of the 9. A retired postal worker from the north side of Harmon City. A high school teacher from the West End. A man who had owned a dry cleaning shop on Corbin Avenue before the business failed the year after Dana's arrest cost him 3 days in a cell. A young woman, now 24, who had been 16 when the encounter with Dana happened, and who had spent 8 years carrying it without knowing anyone else was carrying something similar. A grandmother named Ida, who had walked with a cane since a knee surgery, and who sat in that witness chair and described what had happened to her grandson in a voice that did not waver once. A man who drove a city bus on Route 14. He did not know Edmund Webb, but he sat in the same stand and told the same kind of story. in the same quiet, steady voice of someone who has spent a long time waiting to be believed. They came, they sat, they spoke, and this time their words were entered into the record. And this time they stayed. The jury was out for 11 hours, guilty on all counts: perjury, aggravated battery, official misconduct, civil rights deprivation under color of law. Judge Elaine Morrow presided over the sentencing. Dana stood between her attorneys. Smaller now, the way things get smaller when the structure that was holding them up is gone. Morrow looked at her. She said, "Officer Pruitt, this court has heard 4 days of evidence. The evidence has not been ambiguous. The jury has not been uncertain." She said, "You did not merely lie under oath. You used this court built to protect the innocent as a weapon against the very people it exists to serve." She said, "The sentence I impose today is not only for what you did to Marcus Webb. It is accountability for every person whose complaint was buried before it could be heard, for every voice that was filed and reclassified and set aside, for every life disrupted by a badge you were not fit to carry. I am sentencing you to 8 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will not be eligible for early release consideration during the first 4 years. Upon your release, you will not hold any position in law enforcement in this state. Not in any capacity." The bailiff led her out. She did not speak. She did not threaten. She was silent. The quiet she carried out of that courtroom was a different kind than any she had carried before. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery for the sentencing. 3rd row, gray suit, hands in his lap. The same steady attention he had brought to everything. When the gavel came down, he stood, collected his jacket, and walked to the exit. 3 journalists tried to reach him in the hallway. Colton Shaw stepped between them. He said, "My client has a dissertation to finish." Marcus kept walking. 6 months after the sentencing, the Harmon City Council held a special session to vote on the Kellner Street Accountability Act. Marcus Webb testified. He did not tell his story. He did not describe Kellner Street or the holding cell. He presented data, 3 years of research, 413 data points, charts, pattern analyses, documentation, the work he had been doing before any of this happened, the work that had been waiting for a destination it had not asked for. He spoke for 22 minutes. When he finished, the chamber held the quiet that comes when something needed has been said completely clearly at last. The Kellner Street Accountability Act passed that evening. External review of all use of force complaints by an independent board with no departmental ties. Dual activation body cameras that cannot be manually disabled. A civilian oversight board with subpoena power. The act was named for the street, not for Marcus. He had asked for that. Nate Greer was appointed to the Civilian Oversight Board's liaison office, a new position, created partly because of what his notebook contained. He still writes in it every day. He says it is a habit he cannot break. He is right that it is a habit. He is right that he cannot break it. What he understands now that he did not understand in the drugstore his first week is what the habit always was. It was integrity waiting for the moment it was needed most. Judge Elaine Morrow retired the following spring. 22 years on the bench. Her farewell ceremony was held in Courtroom 7. The room was full. Former clerks, colleagues, attorneys from both sides of countless cases. People who had not always agreed with her rulings and had never been able to say they were not fair. A handful of people from the gallery of the preliminary hearing were there too. They had not been invited. They came because it seemed right. At the end of the ceremony, Morrow walked to the bench one final time. She placed her gavel on the wood. She did not strike it. Someone in the gallery asked why. She said, "Because the last time I used it, it meant something. I would like to leave it there." The room went quiet, not the quiet of ceremony, the quiet that comes when something true has been said simply without anything extra in a room full of people who recognize it. She picked up her coat. She tucked it under her arm. She walked toward the door. At the door, she paused. She turned back and looked at the room, the empty bench, the gavel where she had left it, the gallery, the monitor still mounted to the left. She looked at all of it. Then she walked out. The door swung shut. The sound moved down the marble corridor and around the corner and out into the street. And then there was only Courtroom 7, the bench, the gavel, the quiet, the deep, earned quiet of a room where justice had been done and had been done right. The law is not a shield for those who carry a badge. It never was. It was never designed to be. It is, and it has always been, a promise made to the people standing on the other side of one. Marcus Webb finished his dissertation 11 months after the night on Kellner Street. He submitted it in September. The title was still The Geography of Discretion, 460 pages. In the acknowledgments, he thanked his mother and his father. He thanked Dr. Holloway. He thanked Colton Shaw. He wrote one sentence about the research that happened outside the research. He wrote, "Sometimes the data collects itself." The committee approved it unanimously. Dr. Holloway called him that afternoon, her voice warm and slightly worn. She said, "The paragraph in Chapter 4, the one I called you about the night before all of this began." She said, "You fixed it." He said, "You told me how." She said, "You did the work." A pause. She said, "Your father would be proud." He said, "He is." I called him this morning. That evening, Marcus drove to the South Ward. He parked in front of the house where he had grown up. He sat in the car for a moment looking at the front porch at the window of his old bedroom. Then he went inside. His mother had made dinner. His father was at the kitchen table with the evening paper. They ate together. They talked about the dissertation, about what came next, about the teaching position he had applied for, about the left front tire on his car. After dinner, Edmund Webb walked his son to the car. He stood on the sidewalk. The October air. The same cold, the same wood smoke, the same smell of leaves. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. He held it there for a moment. He said, "I am glad you came home." Marcus said, "Me too." He drove back to his apartment. He sat at his desk. He opened the laptop. He opened the file. He scrolled to the data set. 412 entries. And one more. He looked at the 413th for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of his apartment in a city that was slowly, imperfectly, genuinely beginning the long work of becoming better than it had been. Edmund Webb had a theory about cities. He had developed it over 18 years of driving the same 43 stops on Route 14, watching the same city from the same angle 5 days a week, 220-odd working days a year. His theory was this: a city does not know itself. It knows its monuments. It knows its skyline. It knows the story it tells about itself in the brochures and the downtown murals and the speeches the mayor gives at the opening of a new park. But the actual city, the one underneath all of that, the one that is built from the accumulation of 10,000 ordinary days and 10,000 ordinary decisions, that city is mostly invisible to the people who make the decisions about it. The people who see it are the ones at ground level. The bus drivers, the janitors, the people who stock the shelves at 6 in the morning, and the people who clean the offices at 11 at night. The people who ride public transit because they do not have any other option, and who sit in those plastic seats every day, watching the city move past the windows and understanding from long habit exactly which stops get maintained and which ones do not. Edmund Webb saw the city every day. He saw which neighborhoods the city cared about and which ones it tolerated. He saw which people got through the day without incident and which people collected incidents the way some people collect receipts not by choice, but because the world kept handing them out. He saw it. He could not change it. So he did the thing that fathers in his position have done throughout the history of this country. He prepared his son, not to accept the world as it was, not to make peace with it, but to survive it long enough to do something about it. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Say your name first. Never reach for anything without announcing what you are reaching for. He told Marcus those things the way you tell someone how to navigate a place that has dangerous terrain. Not because the terrain should be dangerous, because it is. And because knowing the terrain is the first condition of getting through it. Marcus had carried those instructions into every room he had ever entered where the room was not built for him. The library at Harmon University, where his first year of doctoral work began, and where some of the other students looked at him with the particular polite wariness of people who have not had to share a space before, and are not quite sure what to do with that. The office hours, where he had to explain more than once that he was a student, that he was supposed to be there, that his face and his bag and his purpose were all legitimate. The parking garage where a security guard stopped him twice in the same month, and both times accepted his university ID, and both times said sorry about that in the way people say sorry about that when they are not entirely sorry and want the moment to be over. Marcus had navigated all of it with the same steadiness, not because he was not angry. He was angry. He had been angry about various versions of this since he understood around the age of 10 that the world was keeping a score he had not agreed to participate in, and that the score was not in his favor. He was angry. He had simply learned early to keep the anger in a place that did not cost him the clarity he needed. His father had taught him that too. Not in words. In the way Edmund Webb moved through every encounter with the particular dignity of someone who has decided that they are not going to give the world the satisfaction of their worst reaction. Edmund Webb was not a saint. He was a bus driver from the South Ward who had spent 35 years deciding every single day that he was going to come home. He had always come home. He had made sure his son would too. Detective Iris Vance had started the file because of a number, 91. That was the percentage of Dana Pruitt's use-of-force incidents across her 11-year career that involved Black or Latino subjects. Vance had found it by running a cross-reference that nobody had run before. Or, if they had not done anything with it. She ran it because she had a habit of looking at data that nobody was looking at, and asking the question nobody was asking, which was what would this look like if we put it all in one place and looked at it honestly? What it looked like was 91%. She spent a week running the number different ways to make sure she had not made an error. She had not made an error. Then she started building the file. She requested Dana's use-of-force reports. She requested the complaint records. She requested the body camera malfunction logs. She requested the GPS records. She read through all of it the way you read through something when you are looking for a pattern that you already suspect is there, but that you are not going to call a pattern until you can prove it 5 different ways. She proved it. Then she looked for the memo. The memo was not easy to find. It had been filed in a classification system that was designed she eventually understood to be difficult to navigate unless you knew exactly what you were looking for and where it had been put. Vance knew what she was looking for. She had been in internal affairs for 9 years. She knew where things got put when someone wanted them to stay out of reach. She found the memo, Raymond Pruitt's signature, his authorization code, his language, his decision. 9 complaints. Reclassified, without hearing. because continued review serves no purpose and undermines unit morale. She backed it up in 4 locations. She called a judge she had worked with before. A judge she trusted. She said, "I have something the court needs to see. I am waiting for the right case." The judge said, "I understand. When you have it, call." 18 months later, on the morning of the preliminary hearing in the matter of the People versus Marcus Webb, Vance called. She was told, "Come to courtroom 7. Wait in the hallway. We will let you know when." She waited. 2 hours and 11 minutes. She used the time to read through the file one more time to make sure every page was in the right place, every exhibit properly marked, every piece of the pattern documented in the sequence that would be clearest to a room full of people hearing it for the first time. When the door opened and she was called in, she walked to the stand with the steadiness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally reached the place where she was supposed to put it down. The 6 people who testified at the trial of Dana Pruitt were not the loudest people in the room. They were not the most dramatic. They did not cry, most of them. They did not raise their voices. They sat in the witness stand and they described in plain language what had happened to them or to someone they loved. The retired postal worker from the North Side. He had filed his complaint 4 years ago. He had described in careful detail the encounter with Officer Pruitt that had resulted in a fractured collarbone and charges of disorderly conduct that were eventually dropped, but that had cost him 2 days in holding and several $100s in legal fees. He had waited for the review process. He had waited for months. He had called twice and been told the matter was under review. He had called a 3rd time and been told the matter had been resolved. He had never been told how. When he sat in the witness stand, he did not look at Dana. He looked at the jury. He described it simply, without embellishment, just the facts, in order. The way you describe something when you have been waiting a very long time to be given the chance to describe it to someone who is actually going to write it down. The high school teacher from the West End. She had filed her complaint 6 years ago. She had a photograph of her wrist from the day after. She had kept the photograph. She said she had kept it because she thought someone might ask to see it someday. She was right. The man who had owned the dry cleaning shop on Corbin Avenue. He described the 3 days he had spent in holding after Dana arrested him on what a judge later called insufficient grounds. He described the customers who had come to the shop while he was held and found it closed and assumed it was always closed at that hour. Some of them never came back. He said the shop was still open. He was still there, but it was different now, smaller. He did not use the word justice when the district attorney asked him what he hoped for. He said, "I want someone to write down that it happened. I want it to be in a record somewhere that does not disappear." The young woman who had been 16, she was 24 now. She sat straight in the witness stand. She described what had happened with the particular precision of someone who has told a story so many times in private to friends and family and a therapist that the words have become very exact. She had told it to herself so many times. In the dark, in the months after trying to understand what she had done wrong, and arriving over and over at the conclusion that she had not done anything wrong, but finding that conclusion hard to hold on to when the process had told her nothing, and the officer who stopped her was still on the street. She said, "I just want people to know it was real. It was real." The grandmother Ida with the cane. She came in slowly. The bailiff offered to help her. She declined. She sat in the witness stand and she put both hands on the handle of the cane, and she looked at the jury and she described what had happened to her grandson. She said he was 20 years old. He was on his way to work. He was not doing anything. She said, "I filed the complaint myself. My grandson did not want me to. He said nothing was going to happen." She paused. She said he was right for 6 years. "But I kept the copy I made. I have it in a folder at home. She said I always thought I might need it someday. She was right, too. And the man who drove a city bus, Route 9, the East Corridor. The one that came up the long hill past the hospital and turned at Millard and came back down through the South Ward. He did not know Edmund Webb. They had never worked the same routes, but he drove the same kind of road and knew the same kind of city from the same seat at ground level. He described the encounter in straightforward language, what he had said, what Dana had said, what happened to his shoulder, what the report said afterward, what the review said afterward, which was nothing. He sat in that witness stand and he spoke clearly and at a volume that could not be disputed. He said his name first. He had been taught the same things Edmund Webb had taught his son. He sat in the same chair Marcus had sat in at the defendant's table, except he was in the witness stand now, and the table was behind him, and what was in front of him was a jury that was listening. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They honored the weight, guilty on all counts. The morning after the verdict, Marcus Webb woke up at 6:15. He made coffee. He sat at his desk. He opened the dissertation file. He had been avoiding the file for 3 months, not because the research had gone anywhere, but because there was something uncomfortable about looking at the data when he was inside the data. Now he opened it. He read through Chapter 4 from the beginning, the framing paragraph, the one Dr. Holloway had called about, the one she had said she knew how to make stronger. He read what he had written before. He thought about what she had said. He rewrote the paragraph. It took him 45 minutes. When he was done, he read it back. It was better. Not because it was more dramatic, because it was more honest, because he understood now from the inside of the thing he had been studying what he had been trying to say when he wrote the paragraph and had not quite gotten there yet. He saved the file. He closed the laptop. He sat for a while with his coffee getting cold and the morning light coming through the window and the city of Harmon outside, doing what cities do, waking up, going about the business of a day, carrying all of it, the good and the bad, and the ordinary and the enormous, all at once, the way cities always do. He thought about his father. He picked up his phone and called him. Edmund Webb answered on the third ring. He sounded like he had been up for hours. He probably had. Old habits. Marcus told him about the paragraph. Edmund Webb did not say much about the paragraph. He was not a man who said much when a little would do. He said, "I heard the verdict on the news this morning." Marcus said, "I know. I saw you called last night. I was going to call you back today." A pause. Edmund said, "You doing all right?" Marcus said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm all right." Another pause. Longer. Edmund said, "Good." He said, "Come by for dinner sometime this week. Your mother made too much food again." Marcus said, "I'll be there Thursday." He said it the way people say things they mean, simply and without complication. He put the phone down. He reopened the laptop. He opened the data file. 413 entries. He looked at the last one for a long time. Then he started writing. There is something worth understanding about the way the Harmon City Police Department handled the 9 complaints against Dana Pruitt. It was not dramatic. It was not a conspiracy in the sense of people meeting in back rooms and making explicit agreements. It was something more ordinary than that, and in some ways more troubling. It was a system that had been built over decades to solve a specific problem, which was, how do you handle a complaint against an officer when the officer's father is the deputy chief? The answer the department arrived at, not through any single decision, but through the accumulation of smaller ones, was a classification code. A code that flagged a complaint as resolved without requiring the resolution to be documented in the same level of detail as a complaint that had gone through formal review. The code existed officially for legitimate purposes: to close complaints that were clearly without merit, to avoid clogging the review queue with frivolous filings. In practice, in the Harmon City Police Department, the code had a second use. It was the answer to the question of what to do with the complaint when the officer's father did not want it to go to review. 9 times, Iris Vance had documented each one. She had documented the date the complaint was filed, the date it was reclassified, the number of days between the two. The average was 11 days. 11 days from filing to disappearance. 11 days for a person's account of what happened to them to travel from the complaint desk to the filing cabinet to the classification code to nowhere. When Vance put those 11-day intervals on a timeline alongside Dana's use of force incidents, alongside the body camera malfunction logs, alongside the GPS records from the nights in question, the picture that emerged was not subtle. It was clear. It was the picture of a system that had been quietly arranged to protect one person from the consequences of who she was, not the consequences of her character. Her character had never been at issue officially. The consequences of her father's name on the door of the deputy chief's office. That is what the system had been protecting. And the system had protected it for 11 years. Until Iris Vance built an 18-month file and carried it to the right courtroom on the right morning and put it on the ledge in front of a judge who had spent 22 years making sure that files like that one did not get set aside. Nate Greer did not leave the Harmon City Police Department. Some people assumed he would. Some people thought the pressure would drive him out the way it drives out people who break the silence in institutions where silence is expected. He stayed. He applied for the liaison position with the Civilian Oversight Board the week after it was announced. He submitted his application with a cover letter that was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph described his experience. The second paragraph said I kept a notebook for 8 months because something told me I needed to. I want to work in a role where that instinct is part of the job rather than a complication in it. He was the only applicant who submitted a notebook as part of his application materials. The board appointed him. He still writes in the notebook every day, not because he is worried about what he will see, not because he is building another file, because the habit of honest witness is not something you turn on and off. It is not a tool you pick up for a specific job and put down when the job is done. It is a practice. Like any other practice, it requires showing up every day and doing the same careful thing, whether or not anything dramatic is happening, whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not the day produces anything worth writing about. Most days, it does not produce anything worth writing about. That is fine. That is in fact the point. The notebook is not a record of dramatic events. It is a record of ordinary days seen by someone who is paying attention. The dramatic events stand out only because of the ordinary days around them, only because you have been paying attention long enough to know what you are looking at when something changes. Nate Greer had been paying attention. He was going to keep paying attention. That was all. That was enough. The Kellner Street Accountability Act passed on a Tuesday evening in March. Marcus Webb was in the chamber when the vote was counted. He sat in the public gallery in the 3rd row with his hands in his lap, the same way he had sat in the gallery at Dana Pruitt's sentencing. When the chair announced the final tally, there was a moment of quiet before the chamber responded. The kind of quiet that has a particular texture. Not the quiet of uncertainty. The quiet of people absorbing the fact that something real has just happened. Marcus sat with it. He thought about his father's kitchen. He thought about the red marks on the calendar. He thought about Edmund Webb driving the Route 14 bus through the South Ward every morning for 18 years. He thought about the 413. He thought about the bus driver who had testified at the trial, who had sat in the witness stand and said his name first. He thought about Ida with the cane, who had kept a copy in a folder because she thought she might need it someday. He thought about Priya, who had pressed record because a voice below her window did not sound right. He thought about Nate Greer and 2 seconds on a cold street, and the notebook that was already in his pocket before he understood why it was there. He thought about Iris Vance and 91% in 18 months, and a leather case carried with both hands to the right courtroom on the right morning. He thought about Judge Elaine Morrow, and 22 years and a gavel left on a bench because the last time it was used, it meant something. He thought about all of that. He sat with it. Then the chamber cleared and the lights came up in the hallway, and Marcus Webb collected his coat and walked out into the March night. The air was cold. The same cold it always was. He stood on the steps of the municipal building for a moment. He looked at the city. The South Ward, somewhere to the south of him, the lights of it visible from here, a grid of streetlights and windows and all the ordinary evidence of people living their lives in the particular conditions those lives had given them. His father was probably at the kitchen table. His mother was probably in the other room. He would go by Thursday for dinner. He walked to his car. He drove home. He sat at his desk. He opened the laptop. He opened the file. He looked at the 413th entry. He thought about the paragraph in Chapter 4, the framing paragraph, the one he had rewritten. He thought about what it said now and what it had said before, and the distance between those two versions. The distance was not large, a few sentences, a reframing of the central claim, but the distance was real. Before, the paragraph had described the problem from the outside, as a pattern to be observed, as a finding to be documented. After, it described it from the inside, from the perspective of the person who was inside the pattern, who was inside the documentation, who was himself a data point in the research he had been conducting. That was what Dr. Holloway had seen. That was what she had wanted him to find. Not a more dramatic framing, a more honest one. The truth, it turned out, was more powerful than anything he would have written if the night on Kellner Street had not happened. Not because what happened to him was a good thing. It was not a good thing. It was an unjust thing that should never have happened. But the truth of it, placed honestly inside the research, made the research into something it could not have been before. It made it undeniable. It made it 413. Raymond Pruitt had a photograph on his desk for 26 of his 32 years on the force. It showed him at his badge ceremony the day he was promoted to sergeant. He was 32 years old in the photograph. He was thin then, with thick dark hair, and he was smiling the particular smile of a man who has just received something he has been working toward for a long time. His daughter was 8 in that photograph. She was standing beside him holding his hand. She was wearing a red coat and looking up at the photographer with the solemn seriousness of a child who has been told that this is an important day and believes it completely. He had kept that photograph on the desk through every posting, every promotion, every office. He looked at it sometimes in the weeks after his plea, not with nostalgia. With the complicated grief of someone looking at a version of themselves they had believed in completely at the time and can no longer find their way back to. The man in that photograph had believed in the institution, had believed that the institution with all its flaws and imperfections was fundamentally on the side of something true. He had spent 32 years shaping himself and his career around that belief. And then, over the 11 years of his daughter's career, he had slowly hollowed out the institution he claimed to believe in. Complaint by complaint, classification code by classification code, memo by memo, until what remained was not an institution at all, but a set of walls around one person who had been allowed to believe that she was the institution. He understood that now. He was not sure when he had stopped understanding it the first time. He thought it had happened gradually. The first complaint, the decision to handle it quietly, the rationalization. She was new. It was a learning curve. The complaint was exaggerated. And then the second. and the rationalization again, and the third. And somewhere in there, the rationalization had become invisible, had become the background, had become simply the way things were. He sat in his quiet house and he looked at the photograph. The 8-year-old in the red coat looked back at him with her solemn eyes. He put the photograph face down in a drawer. He did not look at it again. Sandra Okafor's review of Dana Pruitt's cases took 8 months. Her office went through 47 cases in total. In 11 of them, they found grounds for concern. In 7 of those 11, they filed motions. 3 of the 7 defendants were still incarcerated. The day the motions were filed, Okafor's office sent notification letters. Each letter was addressed by name. Each letter described in plain language what had been found and what was being done about it. 2 of the 3 incarcerated defendants received their letters on the same morning. One of them, a man named Derek, who had been inside for 3 years on charges that rested substantially on Dana's testimony, received his letter at breakfast. He read it twice. He put it face down on the cafeteria table. He sat for a while. He was not a man who cried easily. He had not cried in 3 years. He had learned in 3 years that crying in this place cost you things you could not afford to lose. He picked the letter back up. He read it a 3rd time. Then he folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, where he could feel it was there. Marcus Webb's teaching position at Harmon University began in September, a year after the night on Kellner Street. He taught an undergraduate seminar called Urban Systems and Power. 14 students. A windowless classroom on the 3rd floor of the sociology building. On the first day, he put the syllabus on the board, and he looked at the 14 students, and he said, "This course is about how cities work. Not how they say they work, how they actually work. Those are often different things. Sometimes they are very different things. This course is about understanding that difference." He did not mention Kellner Street. He did not mention the trial. He did not mention his dissertation. He taught the class. He assigned data sets. He asked students to look at things carefully. He asked them to ask questions about the things they were looking at. He asked them to not accept the official language as a substitute for the actual picture. On the last day of the semester, one of the students came to him after class. She was 19. She was from the east side of Harmon City. Her father drove a delivery truck. She said, "I looked up your dissertation." She said, "My cousin is in one of those data points." She said it matter-of-factly, not accusatorially, just as a fact. Marcus said, "I know that it is not abstract for a lot of people." She said, "No, it is not." A pause. She said, "But it helped. Reading it, having it explained, seeing that someone wrote it down." She said, "My cousin is out now, one of the cases they reviewed." She said he wants to know who wrote the dissertation. Marcus said, "Tell him." She said, "Okay." She left. Marcus sat at his desk for a while. He thought about the 413. He thought about the bus driver at the trial. He thought about Ida with the cane. He thought about the man who had kept his dry cleaning shop open. He thought about the 19-year-old whose cousin had been inside for 3 years on charges built on a lie. He thought about all of them, and then he opened his laptop and started preparing the syllabus for next semester, because the work was not done. The work he had come to understand was not the kind of thing that was ever done. It was the kind of thing you showed up for every day and did carefully and honestly and without stopping, because the alternative was letting the silence win. And the silence had already had too long a run. The gavel judge, Elaine Morrow, left on the bench, was eventually moved to a case in the hallway outside Courtroom 7. Not on display, not labeled, just there. In the case alongside it was the text of the Kellner Street Accountability Act framed. And beside that, a copy of the first page of Marcus Webb's dissertation, The Geography of Discretion, also framed. Not because anyone had made a formal decision to put those things together, because the clerk who was responsible for that hallway had decided on her own that those things belonged near each other. The clerk's name was June. She had worked in that courthouse for 17 years. She had seen a great many things come and go. She had never in 17 years seen a morning quite like the morning when that monitor came on in Courtroom 7 and the room went quiet for 6 seconds. She put those things in the case because she thought people should know that they were connected, that the gavel and the act and the dissertation were all in some sense the same thing, a refusal to let the truth disappear. A decision made by different people in different rooms on different days to write it down, to hold it up, to say clearly, this happened, here's the evidence, here is what we are going to do about it. She thought people should know those things were connected. So she put them in the case and she left the case unlocked. And people who walked past could stop and look if they wanted to. Many of them did. There's one more thing worth saying before this story is finished. It is not about Dana Pruitt. It is not about Raymond Pruitt. It is not even about the verdict or the act or the gavel left on the bench. It is about the people who are not in this story at all. The ones who filed complaints that were buried not in Harmon City but in 100 cities that look like Harmon City. The ones who made the phone call and were told the matter was under review, and then were told the matter had been resolved, and then were told nothing more. The ones who did not have a Priya with a phone and an open window. The ones who did not have an Iris Vance who had been building a file for 18 months. The ones who did not have an Elaine Morrow, who had been on the bench for 22 years, and who called in the footage, and who read the memo aloud into the record, and who looked at Dana Pruitt for 6 full seconds of silence before she spoke. Those people exist. They are not in this story because their stories did not have these particular pieces in these particular places at this particular moment. Not because their stories were less true. Not because what happened to them was less real. Just because the notebook was not there, or the window was closed, or the file took too long to build before the right case arrived. This story happened to end the way it should have. Not all of them do. That is not a reason to stop telling the ones that do. It is a reason to tell them as clearly as possible and to say as plainly as possible what made them end this way. Iris Vance, 18 months, a file, Priya, a window, record, Nate Greer. A notebook. The truth told finally. Elaine Morrow, 22 years, a bench. Marcus Webb, A Father's Lessons. Clarity Under Pressure, 413. Those are the pieces. In Harmon City on this occasion, they were all in the same place at the same time. That is not something to be cynical about. That is something to be grateful for, and something to work toward. Every city has people like these. Every city has the capacity to arrange those pieces in the right places. It does not happen by accident. It does not happen because good things naturally prevail. It happens because people decide to show up every day and do the careful, honest, unglamorous work of being a witness, of writing things down, of backing things up, of carrying files to the right rooms, of staying on benches for 22 years and never deciding that convenience matters more than truth. That is the work. It is not dramatic work. Most days it does not feel like anything except the same careful thing you did yesterday and will do again tomorrow. But it accumulates. And sometimes, when enough of it has accumulated in the right places, it produces a morning, like the morning in Courtroom 7, when the monitor came on and the room went quiet for 6 seconds, and the gavel came down, and something changed, and justice, late and imperfect and hard-won, was done. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you why that work matters, why the daily discipline of bearing honest witness is one of the most important things a person can do, we would be grateful if you subscribe to our channel. Stories like this one deserve to travel as far as they can, because the promise of the law belongs to everyone. And as long as there are people willing to hold it, it always will.